June 6, 1944. Omaha Beach, Normandy, France. The dawn was barely breaking, but the horizon was already alive with smoke and fire. Landing craft groaned against the waves as they surged toward the beach, each one carrying young American soldiers with hearts pounding and stomachs tight with fear. The roar of German artillery was deafening, each shell crashing into sand, wood, and metal around them. Some men clutched their rifles like lifelines, others closed their eyes, praying for the minutes to pass. The beach itself looked like a war-torn nightmare, torn bunkers, barbed wire, and the broken remnants of soldiers who had come before them. The first wave hit the sand with brutal force. Bullets zipped past, ripping through the air, and men fell instantly. Every step forward was a gamble with death. Yet through the chaos, something caught their eyes, a glimmer of order in the madness. Across a narrow stretch of sand, British soldiers were advancing in formation, their movements disciplined, their faces calm even under fire. For a moment, American troops froze, staring at these allies who seemed almost untouchable in contrast to the chaos around them. It was a shock. Some whispered under their breath, barely able to believe what they were seeing. Others felt a strange surge of relief. Here were men who had faced battle before, soldiers who could hold the line where they might falter. And in that brief moment, fear mingled with hope. Could they survive this hell? Could they really push forward and break through the Atlantic Wall? Everywhere, officers were shouting orders over the cacophony. Eisenhower's strategy was unfolding miles behind them, Bradley's divisions were moving inland, and Rommel's defenders were desperately trying to hold their positions. The American soldiers, caught in the middle, had only their training, their instincts, and the sight of the advancing British units to guide them. Then came the first twist. A sudden German counter-barrage landed just yards from the Americans. Men dived into craters, dragging the wounded with them, hearts hammering, lungs burning. Yet despite the terror, the presence of the British troops gave them a fragile sense of solidarity. They weren't alone in this fight. Every glance exchanged on that beach carried unspoken messages: courage, determination, and the desperate will to survive. The sound of machine guns, mortars, and cries of men filled the morning air, blending into a terrifying symphony. Yet even amidst the carnage, the Americans couldn't take their eyes off their allies. How had the British managed to advance so far, so smoothly? And more importantly, could they learn, adapt, and survive alongside them? Before we go deeper, make sure you subscribe. This story only gets darker from here. The morning sun climbed higher, burning through the smoke and mist that clung to Omaha Beach. The chaos of the landing continued, but something remarkable began to unfold. The American soldiers, battered and shaken from the first wave, started noticing the British troops in the neighboring sector. They moved with precision, covering each other, keeping their heads low, and advancing steadily despite the deafening artillery. For the Americans, this was almost unreal, a stark contrast to the panic and confusion that surrounded them. At first, the soldiers simply stared. Some whispered comments under their breath, disbelief mixing with awe. "Look at them, still standing," one muttered, gripping his rifle tighter. The British men seemed untouchable, calm in the storm, carrying out orders with a professionalism born of hard-fought experience in North Africa and Italy. For a fleeting moment, the Americans felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could survive this day. But relief was short-lived. German artillery zeroed in on the advancing British units, explosions throwing sand and debris into the air. The Americans realized that admiration alone wouldn't save them. They had to act, to fight, to move forward. Some officers shouted for coordinated fire, signaling across the beach. Bradley's troops inland were pressing on, while Eisenhower's command was tracking every move, hoping the beachhead would hold long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Amid the chaos, small acts of courage became monumental. An American soldier crawled across open sand to drag a wounded comrade into cover, bullets grazing his helmet. Nearby, a British soldier fired back with unwavering focus, saving lives in the process. The Americans began to understand that survival wasn't just luck, it was cooperation, split-second decisions, and learning from those around them. Even as they regrouped, a new curiosity gripped them. How had the British trained for this? How could men remain so composed under relentless fire? Every glance toward their allies carried both questions and reassurance. It wasn't just the strategy or the weapons. It was the spirit, the discipline, the shared will to push forward. In that tense, muddy, blood-stained stretch of Normandy, fear was still their constant companion, but now it was tempered with awe and determination. The soldiers realized they were no longer alone. Side by side, Americans and British would fight through the storm, each inspired and challenged by the other, learning quickly that every small decision could mean the difference between life and death. The beach was a blur of sand, smoke, and chaos. American and British soldiers alike were pinned down by German machine gun fire, every step forward a gamble with death. But something remarkable was happening. The two forces were beginning to move as one. American soldiers watched the British take precise, coordinated actions, advancing toward bunkers and pillboxes with lethal efficiency. Inspired, they mirrored their movements, covering each other, returning fire, and slowly pushing the line forward. Eisenhower's plan was unfolding in real time. Every push inland mattered. Bradley's divisions were moving with cautious determination, while Patton's armored units waited just behind the beachhead, ready to exploit any breakthrough. Up ahead, Rommel's fortifications were heavily defended, but the Allies' combined firepower and strategy were beginning to tell. Amid the noise and bloodshed, small acts of courage became defining moments. One American soldier, pinned under a barrage of bullets, saw a British officer sprint across open sand to provide covering fire. That single act allowed the American to crawl toward safety. In that instant, awe and respect turned into trust, a fragile bond born in the crucible of battle. Yet the beach demanded constant vigilance. Snipers hidden in ruined buildings, artillery strikes, and sudden explosions reminded every man that a moment's distraction could be fatal. The Americans noticed the British soldiers communicating silently through gestures, moving in perfect synchrony, and it sparked questions. Could they coordinate well enough under fire? Could trust survive amidst the chaos of war? Then came a twist. A hidden German machine gun nest opened fire from an unexpected angle, cutting down several advancing soldiers. Panic threatened to break the line, but the Americans quickly adapted, laying down suppressive fire and advancing alongside their British counterparts. The moment highlighted a brutal truth. Survival depended not just on courage but on learning from one another in real time. By midday, the tide of battle was subtly shifting. The Americans and British, once strangers on the sands of Normandy, had begun to trust each other with their lives. Every step forward brought new challenges, but also the realization that together they were stronger than the sum of their parts. Each squad, each rifle, each suppressed gunfire became part of a larger symphony of survival. In the smoke and blood, the soldiers understood something vital. In this shared fire, they weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting alongside allies who would risk everything to protect them, and that bond would shape the outcome of the day. The battle had moved inland. The sands of Omaha Beach gave way to rough terrain. Craters, ruined roads, and the shattered remnants of villages left in the wake of relentless bombing. American soldiers pressed forward with the British at their side, but the further they advanced, the more deadly the landscape became. German fortifications weren't just on the beach. They sprawled inland, hidden among hedgerows, farmhouses, and narrow streets. Each step felt like walking through a minefield. Fear weighed heavily on every soldier. The deafening echo of artillery was now mixed with the close, intimate sound of gunfire, bullets striking wood, metal, and flesh within yards. Some men froze, others pressed on, driven by instinct and a stubborn will to survive. The British troops moved with confidence, their experience from campaigns in North Africa and Italy shining through. The Americans studied them, learning quickly, adapting, and realizing that in this war, survival meant constant observation and immediate action. Amid the chaos, moments of human connection emerged. An American squad stumbled across a French resistance fighter, wounded but defiant. Together, they navigated the labyrinth of hedgerows and ruins, sharing information, covering each other, and moving toward objectives. De Gaulle's presence loomed in the background, his leadership and the resistance's coordination a reminder that the battle was about more than soldiers, it was about liberating a nation. The suspense grew with every turn. Mines hidden beneath rubble, snipers in the attic of ruined houses, and sudden ambushes tested the men's nerves. Communication lines were strained, and officers had to make split-second decisions with lives hanging in the balance. One wrong choice could lead to disaster, and the Germans, aware of every weakness, struck ruthlessly. Then came the twist. A narrow, concealed path through a ruined farmhouse offered a chance to flank a heavily defended German position. American and British soldiers exchanged quick, silent glances and decided to take the risk. The maneuver was dangerous, but it offered a glimpse of hope, a way to turn the tide and push deeper into occupied territory. By nightfall, the soldiers were exhausted, muddy, and bloodied, but a fragile sense of accomplishment began to take root. They had survived, adapted, and worked together, learning that trust and courage were as essential as bullets and strategy. Each man knew the coming days would be just as brutal, yet the memory of shared victories, however small, fueled a quiet determination to keep moving forward. By mid-morning, the battle for Omaha Beach and the surrounding dunes had reached a fever pitch. The Americans and British were finally beginning to gain small footholds, pushing back German forces who had been confident of victory. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the sound of artillery pounding like relentless thunder, and the cries of men echoing across the shattered landscape. Each step forward was hard-won, yet the soldiers could feel momentum slowly shifting. Bradley's divisions coordinated artillery barrages with infantry movements, while Montgomery's British units advanced in disciplined waves, providing cover for their American allies. The two forces, learning from each other under fire, were starting to mesh. American soldiers who had arrived at the beach hours earlier, terrified and unsure, were now moving with purpose, mirroring the British soldiers' discipline. Every glance toward their allies reminded them that survival depended on unity. Amid the chaos, courage revealed itself in the smallest moments. An American medic risked life and limb to pull a wounded British soldier to safety, bullets whizzing past both of them. Nearby, a British officer helped an American squad navigate a mine-strewn path to flank a German position. These acts of bravery, though small individually, began to tip the scales in favor of the Allies. Suspense and danger remained constant. German snipers were still hidden among ruined buildings, artillery strikes continued to rain down without warning, and the defenders launched counterattacks designed to throw the soldiers back into the sea. Every American and British soldier knew that one wrong step could mean death, yet they pressed on, driven by a mix of fear, duty, and hope. Then came an unexpected twist. A German officer, believing the Allies were retreating, exposed a weak point in the defense line. A combined push by American and British squads exploited it, forcing the Germans to fall back and leaving a small corridor open. This shift allowed more troops to advance inland, and the soldiers felt, perhaps for the first time, that victory on the beach was within reach, though it came at the cost of many lives. By late afternoon, the tide was turning. The beachhead, once a chaotic nightmare, was becoming a carefully contested zone where discipline, courage, and quick thinking made all the difference. The Americans and British had begun to operate as one force, learning from each other under fire, and each successful advance brought them closer to securing Normandy. In the midst of exhaustion and loss, there was hope, fragile, hard-earned, and powerful. Night was falling over the Normandy coastline, but the battle was far from over. American and British soldiers, battered and exhausted, had dug in along the newly secured positions. The sand was churned into mud, littered with spent shells and the remnants of destroyed vehicles. Smoke hung low in the air, carrying the acrid scent of gunpowder, and somewhere in the distance, the cries of men still in combat echoed faintly. In the dim light, soldiers began to catch their breath and exchange stories in hushed tones. Fear had dominated the day, but now reflection started to creep in. Some shared news of comrades lost just hours before, others remarked on the bravery of their allies. The British, with their calm and precise movements under fire, had left a lasting impression on the Americans. "I've never seen anyone move like that under fire," one muttered, shaking his head. "They make it look easy." The two forces were no longer just strangers fighting side by side, they were forming bonds in the heat of survival. Small gestures mattered, a shared ration, covering each other's positions, offering reassurance in moments of doubt. Even as darkness settled, the soldiers were hyper-aware of danger. Snipers lurked, German patrols prowled, and the sounds of movement through the sand kept nerves taut. A twist revealed itself in the quiet moments. A diary found on a fallen soldier told of surprising connections. Names, hometowns, and letters to loved ones showed how much these men had in common, even across national lines. It was a sobering reminder that war was about more than strategy and bullets. It was about people, their stories, and the fleeting human moments in the middle of chaos. In this fragile night, the soldiers also began to recognize the true weight of leadership. Officers like Eisenhower, Bradley, and Montgomery were making decisions miles away, yet every choice rippled down to these men in the trenches. They realized their lives depended not just on courage but on trust in each other and in the chain of command. Through the darkness, voices whispered. Some told jokes to lighten the mood, others shared fears that could no longer be contained. It was a strange mix of exhaustion and camaraderie, loss and hope. The Americans and British had survived another day, and while tomorrow promised new dangers, tonight they were bound together, a shared force against the chaos, learning that even in war, the smallest human connections could shape survival. The first light of dawn revealed the shattered villages and bombed-out roads that lay inland from Omaha Beach. American and British soldiers, still exhausted from the previous day's hell, pressed forward. Every step carried the memory of loss, every glance toward the horizon reminded them that German defenses were still deadly and relentless. Yet alongside fear was determination, the shared resolve to break through and secure the beachhead for the rest of the Allied forces. Eisenhower's strategy, executed through Bradley and Montgomery, demanded precision and coordination. American squads advanced alongside British units, exchanging signals and mimicking movements learned under fire. Machine gun nests were neutralized with combined fire, snipers were hunted down, and artillery strikes were carefully timed to create corridors through enemy lines. The beachhead was no longer the chaotic hell of the landing. It had begun to transform into a disciplined, coordinated force moving with purpose. But the inland push was far from smooth. Mines hidden beneath rubble and sudden ambushes reminded soldiers that danger was everywhere. Roads were littered with craters and debris, slowing vehicles and forcing infantry to move on foot through open fields. Every village could hide enemy soldiers, every hedge could conceal a sniper. Suspense hung over every advance, and the men learned quickly that hesitation could be deadly. Amid the tension, human stories continued to emerge. Soldiers shared rations, encouraged each other, and offered quiet reassurances in moments of despair. Some wrote hurried letters in the mud, others whispered prayers for loved ones far away. Even amidst carnage, the humanity of the soldiers, their courage, their loyalty, became the backbone of the operation. Then came the twist. A German counterattack hit a small American-British flank unexpectedly. Soldiers scrambled to adapt, improvising defenses and using the terrain to their advantage. Leaders like Patton coordinated reinforcements, while Montgomery's officers reorganized units under fire. The crisis revealed the resilience of the men, and the growing trust between the Americans and their British allies. By late afternoon, the inland push had achieved critical progress. The combined forces had captured key crossroads, secured small villages, and pushed German defenders back further than anyone had dared hope. Each step forward was a testament to courage, strategy, and the fragile bonds formed in the smoke and blood of battle. The soldiers realized that survival and victory depended not just on firepower but on teamwork, trust, and the human spirit. The first light of morning spread across the Normandy countryside, painting the ruined villages and churned earth with a harsh, pale glow. American and British soldiers, exhausted, bloodied, and mud-caked, emerged from the trenches and craters, eyes scanning for the next threat. The beachhead had been secured, but the fight was far from over. Every step inland revealed more devastation, bombed-out homes, shattered roads, and the silent testimonies of lives lost. Yet among the destruction was a fragile sense of triumph. The soldiers moved cautiously, advancing in small squads with British and American units interwoven. Leaders like Eisenhower and Montgomery coordinated from behind the lines, while Patton's armored units pushed forward to exploit the breaches in German defenses. Every movement carried weight, every decision could cost lives. Yet the men pressed on, driven by a shared understanding that this was their moment, the moment that could tip the war toward liberation. Amid the tension, human stories continued to shine. An American soldier helped a British comrade over a collapsed wall. A British officer shared water with a tired squad of Americans, their exhausted smiles brief but meaningful. In the midst of battle, fleeting gestures like these became lifelines, reminders that they were not alone. They were fighting together, for each other, and for the hope of freeing France from occupation. The suspense never lifted. Hidden snipers, scattered mines, and sudden artillery bursts kept every man on edge. Even as villages fell and German forces retreated, danger lurked in every shadow. The Americans and British had learned to rely on each other, reading subtle signals, adapting to chaos, and trusting that their allies would cover their backs. This trust, forged under fire, was as vital as any weapon in their arsenal. Then came the twist. A German officer had feigned surrender, luring a small group into a trap. But quick thinking and training saved the soldiers. A tense firefight ensued, and the trap was neutralized. The incident reminded every man that war carried hidden costs, that victory was never guaranteed, and that vigilance could mean the difference between life and death. By midday, the inland push had reached a critical milestone. The combined forces had secured villages, cleared roadways, and established a corridor for reinforcements. The Americans, who had landed hours earlier terrified and uncertain, now stood with battle-worn confidence. The British, their discipline and courage evident from the start, had become partners in a shared struggle. Together, they had transformed fear into action, chaos into order, and survival into progress. And yet, the cost of victory was clear. Wounded soldiers were tended, fallen comrades remembered, and civilians emerged from hiding, eyes wide at the destruction. The men felt the weight of both triumph and sorrow, knowing that freedom was won through sacrifice and courage. Each handshake, each glance between American and British soldiers carried unspoken gratitude, a bond forged in the furnace of war that would endure far beyond the beaches of Normandy. The dawn of liberation had come, fragile and hard-earned. The soldiers paused briefly, taking in the view of the liberated land and the distant horizon. They knew that more battles awaited, but for this moment they had survived together, a testament to courage, unity, and the human spirit in the darkest hours of history. If you want more WW2 stories like this, filled with hidden moments and untold perspectives, subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of history.